Hello boys and girls, how are you all? Today I'm going to be talking about how China wants to sabotage, ruin and destroy India's role and initiative as G20 president this year. Now, this is not very surprising. This is not the first time a Chinese leader wished to try to undermine India's leadership. If you go back to Chairman Mao, since the very beginning of our diplomatic history, so you see, People's Republic of China was established in 1949 under the leadership of Mao. And Mao, in the 50s, never saw India as an independent, equal nation state. It always viewed India as a chela, a second fiddle, a stooge, a junior partner of the UK. Why? Because Mao would say India never witnessed a violent revolution. Because Mao was very proud of the fact that China had emerged after winning the civil war. But there was no civil war, there was no revolution in India. The British just left. And Mao said, see, India claims to be socialist, but it has a mixed economy. It still has the capitalist, private sector, businessmen and the bourgeois class. So in a way it is capitalist. See how Nehru targets the communists, how Nehru and the Indian policemen, they jail the communists. India is also bourgeoisie, like America, like the West. So this was the attitude, view, perception of Mao towards India. And today, Xi Jinping is trying everything to derail, to undermine, sabotage and ruin India's G20. Because this is a very important event. And it's not the first time that a developing country has taken such an event so seriously. 2008, 15 years ago, China had taken the Summer Olympics, the very Olympics in which Abhinav Bindra won gold for shooting. That Olympics, China had taken very seriously, had put in a lot of effort, spent a lot of money on advertising to promote Beijing Olympics of 2008. So this is our turn, our time has come. Right, apna time aa gaya, like they say. Right, and China does not want to see India demonstrating global leadership as an aspiring great power. Now, it's very important for us to understand the significance of India's presidency and the timing of it. India has become the president of G20 at a very critical time and juncture. The world is still recovering from the adverse effects from the terrible pandemic, and it is still facing the problems that arose out of the Ukraine war. And the world has high hope, especially countries of the global south. They have high hope and expectations from India. Why? Because we handled the pandemic very well. Also, we have deftly, carefully played our diplomacy in the Ukraine-Russia war. India has also given vaccine, credit support, loans, fuel, fertilizers to developing countries. So India is the president of G20 at the right time, and a very critical time at that. Right? Now, also recently, the soft, careful and successful landing of Chandrayaan has elevated India's status. And the fact that we have reached the 5th spot, we have become the 5th largest economy. We were 10th largest 9 years ago. In 9 years, we have jumped 5 spots. So these things have elevated India's stature and status in global politics. Right? Right. So what we know now, it is announced that the Chinese President Xi Jinping would not be coming to New Delhi to attend the G20 leaders meeting. In his place, his premier Li Qiang is going to attend. So Li Qiang is the representative of China. The same way, China's best friend Putin is not attending the summit. In Putin's place, it is his foreign minister Lavrov who would be attending and representing Moscow in the summit. This is what we know. But of course, Putin not coming to the summit did not surprise anyone, because of course he hadn't attended last year's summit in Bali, Indonesia, and he didn't attend the Johannesburg BRICS summit, which had convened last week. Putin has chosen to carefully, cleverly chosen to attend those summits where Western countries do not dominate, like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right, which was of course held in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Right. Now, so if you see, Putin has to deal with the repercussions of his war. The war is not going as well as he had hoped it would, and it's gone on for almost a year and a half. He thought Ukraine and Kiev would capitulate and collapse within a month, but that didn't happen, and Russia is losing a lot of money. Putin is facing a lot of political rivals and challenges and criticisms back at home. And of course, recently you all know the Wagner group, the private mercenary soldiers group, challenged his authority, almost attempted a coup d'etat to topple Putin's regime. That didn't work out. Of course, he was recently allegedly assassinated. So you see, Putin is facing a lot of problems and he's got his hands full. So it is not a surprise that he would not be attending. Right. Now, if you see, let us understand now the motivations of President Xi Jinping. You see, he is trying to embarrass India's leadership, because G20 is an opportunity to demonstrate India's soft power, culture, traditions, civilizational glory, achievements, heritage, Indian values, diversity, its emerging market, the promise it holds for the West and for the East as an aspirational global power. Right. So how else would you undermine this? By not attending it. You're the second most important economy, second most important power, and you're not going to attend a G20 leaders summit held by your southern neighbor with whom you have a territorial dispute in the Himalayas. Right. So the prestige that would be attained by successfully holding this summit would be nullified, because the second most important economy, the second most populous country and the second most powerful country in the world is not going to be a part of it. Because in a G20 meeting, the leaders joint statement is very essential. If, for example, last year there was, with great difficulty, Indonesia was able to manage to secure a consensus. But this time it would be more difficult. Right. So, G20 represents the majority chunk of the global economy, the most powerful countries in the world, from east and the west, from north and the south. And generating consensus is very difficult. Right. So, and if a summit is able to manage to generate consensus, that summit would be seen as a successful summit. And the host country would be seen as a credible, demonstrable leader. And this would be undermined. Right. Now, just think about it. Xi Jinping attended the BRICS summit held just a few days ago, where of course he was greeted and welcomed by the president of South Africa so well. He's felt so special. And now, a few days later, he's not attending a summit which is of more consequence, of bigger magnitude, of more importance. So obviously, it is not a coincidence. It is a well thought out action on the part of Xi Jinping. Right. So there is an argument and speculation. Many international relations experts, they say that Xi Jinping is trying to undermine Western-led groupings. For example, if you see G20, a great majority of the countries are pro-West, pro-America, anti-China, anti-Russia. And those neutral countries cannot really take a position which is entirely in favor of China or Russia. So the group is dominated by the West and the US. So Xi Jinping is trying to undermine it, render it useless, and is pushing non-Western groupings like BRICS, like SCO, to the forefront of global politics. But this will not work. Think about it. India is also part of BRICS. Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping agreed to de-escalate the problem in the borders. And today, just a few days ago, recently, China released its official map claiming Aksai Chin area and the entirety of Arunachal Pradesh. So what all efforts, what all talk that transpired, that happened, that took place between Xi Jinping and Mr. Modi, useless, worthless, waste of time, down in the toilet. Right? Now, by skipping the Western-dominated G20, Xi Jinping is trying to reinforce the message, the story, the narrative, the slogan that the West is in decline and the East is rising. Right. Now, another motivation for Xi. You see, increasingly, Xi Jinping is seeing himself as not just Mao, he's gone beyond that. The Chinese emperor. Because the Chinese emperor, throughout history, the Chinese emperor thought that he was the son of the heaven. The China was the middle kingdom, and all other powers are tributary states, chelas of China. And China ka emperor ko milega, tributes. So now Xi Jinping wants to be treated grandly. ठीक है? Like His Majesty. So he got this kind of treatment in Johannesburg. President of South Africa accorded him great respect. But he thought India would not give the same amount of respect at the G20 summit, because Xi Jinping would be one among many leaders, with people like Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister of UK, President Biden, Prime Minister Trudeau, Fumio Kishida of Japan, all good friends of India these days. Right. So Xi Jinping did not want to be one among these. He wanted to be the first among these. And he knew he would not be the first among these. Right. Now today he prefers receiving guests rather than visiting foreign countries, especially visiting events where the Western countries would put China and Russia in an uncomfortable position. Right. Now, of course, it can also be said that Xi Jinping may be facing challenges back home, in his own home, rising unemployment, disgruntled and angry and furious and frustrated youth, right? And the bad effects of China's zero COVID policy, the harsh lockdown and the sudden opening up of the economy and the restrictions which led to crores getting infected instantly, lakhs dying, right? The slowdown in the economy, the instability that is becoming increasingly evident to everyone. Right. So probably he had a lot of things to deal with at home, just like Putin. But no. You can see a clear and present danger. You can see conscious efforts made by China. Now, if you see, China may be sending its premier to India, but everybody knows that the real head, the real authority is Xi Jinping himself. And many times, the promises made by the president of China have not been kept. So, on what basis would countries have faith in this premier, in this PM of China, who is representing China at the G20? Right. And if you see, these kind of no-shows, it indicates uncertainty, unpredictability, right? And also, in the last few years, in G20 summit meetings, countries are divided based on ideologies. They are not coming on a common platform. Generation of consensus has become a very difficult affair. Right. Global problems require global solutions, and global solutions require global consensus. And that consensus can be secured by just 20 countries of the world. And even that has become difficult in a world of 190 plus countries. Right. So soon G20's lifespan as a useful country is going to come to an end, and it would soon become a useless forum if this continues. Now, China's attempts at sabotaging, ruining and destroying India's opportunity of showcasing and demonstrating its leadership. See, in substantial matters, in matters of political importance, such as the Russia-Ukraine war, China is insisting that nothing should be against Russia or its actions in Ukraine. And then China is accusing India of deliberately playing politics, of holding certain meetings in Kashmir and in Arunachal Pradesh. China is in fact telling the world to teach India a lesson for politicizing G20. Right? And of course, China has claimed Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh through its maps that were released a few days ago. Again, adding more fuel to the fire. Right? And these are substantive political issues. China is also troubling India even in procedural matters. Right? right, in routine matters, little things, such as it has objected to using the words Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as it is Sanskrit, and Sanskrit is not a UN language, right? Okay. Then China has also objected to holding meetings in Kashmir and Arunachal Pradesh, and China has even objected to certain slogans which are close to the Prime Minister, such as women-led development, right? Even so, it's not just substantive political issues, but also procedural little things where China is trying to trouble India. And what negative implications do these actions have for India? Right? You see, Mr. Modi and Xi Jinping, I mentioned earlier, they met during the BRICS summit. Some sort of an agreement was reached, and now that is nullified. That agreement becomes obsolete. That the understanding that was reached now would be nullified because of the recent political tensions. Of course, we have not seen any sort of a problem in the border, but the maps and the snub, the rejection of the invitation is going to trouble the relations going forward, right? And then, of course, China's Belt and Road Initiative would be Forum Belt and Road Initiative in Beijing would be attended by Vladimir Putin. This is also a bad thing, that Putin is obviously, because Belt and Road Initiative is not dominated by the Western countries, so Putin would be more comfortable going to attend it, right? Now, China has accused India of taking unilateral decisions in bilateral disputes. For example, it accuses India of unilaterally, unjustifiably and unreasonably decommissioning Article 370. It has accused India of politicizing G20 by holding meetings in Kashmir, right? And yet it accuses the ruling party, Mr. Modi, for taking decisions keeping domestic politics in mind, right? So this is the position China holds, and this is, of course, the territorial disputes, right? And it's not just India, other G20 members and ASEAN members. You see, Xi Jinping is not going to attend the ASEAN summit that is underway now. Even there, the Premier of China is attending, because with a bunch of ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, China, Philippines, China is having maritime territorial disputes in the South China Sea, right? So ASEAN is in some ways close to the West. So China is unwilling to attend this summit. Now, it is not just negatives for G20, negatives for India. There are some negatives for China as well, and Xi Jinping's leadership. So these points should not be lost on us. We have to acknowledge these points also. Now you see, this is showing how Xi Jinping, from being a statesman, he's trying to be an emperor, right? How? You see, he has attended every G20 summit since he took office in 2012, except of course the 2021 summit because of COVID restrictions. And Taiwan crisis, the Ukraine crisis, where China has taken position completely against the West, has created some sort of a divide between the West and a Chinese-led order, right? And attending some summits, like the BRICS summit, like the SCO summit, like the BRI summit, and not attending G20 without any valid reason. You see, China did not give any reason, right? Obviously, it's first of all, it's an opaque country. There's no transparency. On top of that, when you take a big decision like this, right, where people will speculate, will talk about it, you're not giving any valid reason, right? So how this would be seen by, let's say, global investors or the global international community? They would see China's policies as being unpredictable, unstable. They would question Xi Jinping's leadership. Is China under Xi Jinping even a credible power? Because China has to show leadership in many of global problems, in WTO, in global climate change, right? And India and Xi Jinping, let's say Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping got along well in BRICS summit, and now by stoking problems, BRICS again will not converge. BRICS has a lot of countries who are against each other. It is no real grouping, right? So his actions, instead of pushing the BRICS upwards and G20 downwards, it is bringing both downwards. Even BRICS would not be taken seriously, because everybody would see how China and India are fighting. So it cannot be a credible alternative to the West or the American-led order. And today, like I mentioned earlier, he's feeling like an emperor. He wishes to receive guests. So recently, leaders from Germany, France, and senior members of the Biden administration had visited Beijing. So he loved receiving them, right? And he focuses more on groupings with less developed countries where China dominates, like the BRICS and the SCO, where China can dictate the agenda. But let's see the positive side of it. What are the positive implications of Xi Jinping not attending the G20 summit in Delhi? See, now the summit can go on very smoothly. It can go on very smoothly, and the focus would not be, see, India has a duty to focus on things that are of importance, that are of consequence, that are of great import, not just to India but to the global south. We have to focus on economic growth, the financial challenges of developing countries, because we are all facing problems because of the pandemic and the war, right? Even the previous summit in Indonesia, Bali, the Russia-Ukraine war had dominated the summit, right? So hopefully it doesn't happen this year, because here you do not have China, Russia's favorite partner. Of course, China is there, but Xi Jinping's absence would not highlight its defense of Russia, right? And China, Xi Jinping's absence would also send a strong message to the other countries that do not see China as an alternative, see India as an alternative, see India as a credible leader, and China under Xi Jinping is not a credible and responsible leader. And Mr. Modi will have more freedom and less controversy in having a very smooth G20 summit, right? Now, the real focus of the summit should be multilateralism, climate change, economic growth, South-South cooperation, and of course, African Union joining as the 21st member of the grouping would make this summit a truly historic summit, right? And of course, it is held in India, and India can emerge as the voice of the global south, right? And let's say if Xi Jinping did attend, media, especially world media, global news media, would have focused on him, his mannerisms, his decisions, his speeches, his talks, and his meetings with Biden, his meeting with Mr. Modi. No. The focus would go away from the global issues and go to these bilateral issues and conflicts, right? So this brings this discussion to an end.